I thought it was a misunderstanding when they said he's a black belt world champion. He's been training 3 years. I remember thinking even in 2000 when I first started, I can't be hearing that right. That's got to be impossible. You don't get a black belt in 3 years. You don't get a purple belt in 3 years most of the time. The idea that he is a black belt world champion training 3 years made no logical sense to me.
But looking back someday, I'm gonna think to myself, damn, I actually pulled that off. But right now, I'm caught up in the chaos of it all. Can't really see the big picture when you're trapped right in the middle of everything.
He was a guy who got put in jiu-jitsu because his dad was just looking for a way to keep him out of trouble. He was starting fights on the street constantly. Every day, the guy would just hop off his bike and start a fight for no reason. And his parents put him in something that they thought would help him.
BJ Penn had it all figured out. Natural ability that couldn't be taught, family money, a pair of UFC belts around his waist. Then he watched it all slip away. Not because of one bad night in the cage, but because of a string of choices that started way before any brain trauma kicked in. This is the story of brilliance and destruction.
Because remember, you carry the name of the gym with you wherever you go. That reputation follows the gym as well. That's why he won a world title with Novignon, but didn't train in MMA with Novignon, from what I heard. But this idea that he was constantly causing an issue everywhere he went, this doesn't go away.
Here's what you need to grasp about BJ Penn's downfall. You've got to understand what made him incredible to begin with. That same thing that made him untouchable also made him a threat to everyone around him, including himself.
When he gets out of his weight class, when he fights guys, once again, Lyoto Machida, he loses by decision to a prime Lyoto Machida, who, if you guys don't remember, is a 205-pounder then. All right, a big dude, and BJ Penn is a 55er.
What Penn accomplished earned him that black belt in 3 years and 4 months flat. He became the first guy outside Brazil to take home the World Jiu-Jitsu Championship at black belt level. That nickname, the Prodigy, wasn't some marketing gimmick. It was just straight facts.
I had heard a million stories about BJ Penn coming to the gym an hour late, smoking everybody, and then leaving a half hour early. I heard 10 different versions of that story when I was coming up. That the dude was just uber talented, but didn't like putting in the work. But when he was firing on all cylinders and taking it seriously, there was no one better.
J.D. Penn came into this world in Kailua, Hawaii on December 13th, 1978. Money was never an issue for his family. His mother, Lorraine Shin, built a successful business empire, and the family controlled serious real estate across the island. Penn didn't step into fighting because he needed the paycheck. He didn't need to do anything to survive, but there he was, throwing hands anyway.
And then he stopped working with Marvin Rinovich right before Frankie Edgar, and that was part of the reason he didn't physically look the same against Frankie Edgar.
This next part changes the entire story. Penn didn't find martial arts because competition called to him. His parents stuck him in martial arts, hoping it would keep him from beating up random people on the street. When Penn hit 17, he started learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu after his neighbor Tom Carlos showed him the basics. Carlos taught Penn and his brothers everything he could pass along. Penn packed up and moved to San Jose, California to train at Ralph Gracie's academy. He worked his way up to purple belt under Gracie, but that wasn't enough for him. Penn headed down to Nova União in Brazil to complete his journey to black belt. He captured that world championship, but even while representing one of the planet's most respected gyms, he kept getting into street fights and stirring up trouble. Word is Nova União got sick of him dragging their reputation through the mud.
You know, you can't take away from the guy's talent, but you can certainly take away from his psychological instability. You can certainly blame him for that. That's always been around. No matter how good he was, there were always these problems with his work ethic. There were always problems with him getting in trouble on the street.
Here's the connecting thread that ties everything together. Penn was causing problems way before he ever took a professional punch. Before the UFC existed in his world. Before he ever stepped into a cage. Before any brain damage from fighting could take the blame. Those street fights, that lack of self-control, all the chaos and drama were already part of who he was. But his talent was so overwhelming that none of the red flags mattered. Not yet anyway.
You know, and it's just as your career fades And the screen that people used to look at, which was the talent and the ability and the performance in the ring, that all goes away. And all that's left is kind of the psychological illness you're left with.
Penn stepped into the octagon for the first time on May 24, 2001 at UFC 31. He showed striking skills that nobody saw coming from someone known purely for groundwork. By 2004, he jumped up to welterweight to go after the champion Matt Hughes at UFC 46. Even with Hughes favored to win, Penn finished him in round 1 with a rear naked choke. That victory gave him the UFC welterweight championship. People still talk about it as one of the biggest upsets MMA has ever seen. Penn joined an exclusive club as only the second fighter in UFC history to hold championships in 2 different divisions. He headlined 11 main events for the UFC. Legendary boxing coach Freddie Roach called Penn the best boxer in all of mixed martial arts. Even Dana White admitted what everyone could see. If you count how many times BJ Penn showed up in phenomenal shape, White said once, "I love BJ Penn. BJ's been a massive star for us for years. But I believe BJ could have been in conversations about who is the greatest of all time. His talent was never the issue. Everything surrounding that talent was the problem."
And that's what disappointed me so much when he made a run for governor. And I saw grapplers that I know supporting this guy's candidacy. And I'm going, this guy's never made a sound decision in his life. And you want him in charge of an entire state because you like the way he grapples or you like the way he fights? That's insane.
The burden of always reaching higher. One of the most confusing things about BJ Penn's career was his obsession with fighting guys way bigger than him. It showed courage and fearlessness, but it might have been a form of self-destruction that kept his ego safe while tearing down everything he'd built. Penn naturally belonged at lightweight. At 155 pounds, completely focused and properly trained, he was probably unstoppable. During his run from the Jens Pulver days through Joe Stevenson, Sean Shirk, Kenny Florian, and Diego Sanchez, he looked like the most dangerous fighter on earth. But Penn could never just settle into that dominance. After taking the welterweight belt from Matt Hughes, he gave it up to go fight in Japan for K1, where the paychecks were bigger. He took on Lyoto Machida, a future light heavyweight champion who walked around at over 220. Penn was giving up almost 70 pounds in that fight. This mindset is everything when it comes to understanding him. By choosing to fight giants, Penn always had the size difference to point to when things went wrong. He never had to fully commit to dominating at 155 and deal with losing when he had no excuses left to use. After capturing that UFC welterweight title, Penn spent 2 years floating around Japan and Hawaii with no real direction, taking fights way above his natural weight. He fought at catchweights, he fought at welterweight. Reports say he even took heavyweight fights against guys who massively outweighed him. When Penn finally came back to 155 with complete focus, he was devastating. Those wins over Joe Stevenson and Sean Shirk were absolute masterpieces. He defended against former champion Sean Shirk at UFC 84, winning by TKO at the end of round 3. Against Kenny Florian, he locked in a rear naked choke at 3:45 of the 4th round to successfully defend his lightweight championship. But welterweight kept calling his name. Georges St-Pierre held that belt and Penn wanted it back, so he moved up again. He challenged GSP for the welterweight title on January 31st, 2009 at UFC 94. Round 1 was competitive, but St-Pierre took control after that. Penn's corner stopped the fight after round 4. Penn got completely picked apart by a bigger, stronger, better prepared opponent. The pattern couldn't be ignored anymore. At lightweight, when he gave everything he had, Penn could beat anyone. At welterweight, going up against the elite, raw talent wasn't enough. He needed the conditioning, the preparation, the total commitment, and those were exactly the things he couldn't deliver consistently. 5 out of the 7 guys who beat BJ Penn were welterweights. His losses to Machida, GSP, Nick Diaz, Rory McDonald, and Matt Hughes in their rematch all came against bigger fighters. When he stayed at 155, he was nearly impossible to beat. When he wandered up to welterweight, he kept getting drowned. Look at the math behind weight cutting. A lightweight walks around somewhere between 170 and 175, then cuts down to 155. A welterweight walks around at 185 to 190 and cuts to 170. When Penn fought Georges St-Pierre, He was giving up 15 to 20 pounds of pure muscle. When he fought Lyoto Machida at that catchweight, the gap was even more brutal. Machida was a natural light heavyweight who would later hold that division's title and compete at 205. Penn's willingness to take these fights showed incredible courage. It also showed something more disturbing, an unwillingness to commit to being the absolute best in one weight class where he'd already proven he could dominate. That psychological safety net was always there waiting for him. Size could always take the blame. The most heartbreaking part is that everyone could see what was happening. Penn only defended his lightweight title 3 times. With his ability, it should have been 10 defenses. It should have been a dynasty that lasted years. Instead, he kept walking away to chase glory in weight classes, where the laws of physics worked against him. The commitment problem. Beyond jumping between weight classes, there was another issue that followed Penn throughout his career. His legendary unwillingness to fully commit to training. Stories spread through the MMA community for years. Penn would roll up late, dominate everyone in the gym without breaking a sweat, then leave before anyone else. His natural gifts were so extraordinary, he could cruise on talent alone, at least for a while. Motivated BJ Penn became a meme and an excuse in MMA circles. The idea was that Penn's losses could all be blamed on his lack of interest in actually preparing for fights, which somehow wasn't considered a career-ending character flaw. When Penn was motivated, he was unstoppable. When he wasn't, he lost. The problem was that motivated BJ Penn only showed up sometimes. Everything changed in 2009 when Penn teamed up with Marv Marinovich. Marv was one of the NFL's first strength and conditioning coaches, the godfather of the NFL Combine format, and a pioneer in combining strength with flexibility. He was also famously the father of Todd Marinovich, the test tube quarterback whose entire childhood had been engineered by his father from birth. Working with the Marinovich team, Penn prepared for back-to-back lightweight title fights against Kenny Florian and Diego Sanchez. Those might have been the 2 most impressive performances of his entire career. He went the distance against elite competition without fading. He looked like a completely different fighter. Marv Marinovich said later, "I think BJ realized that typical traditional training wasn't getting the job done. When we worked with BJ, it's been almost 6 years now. BJ had great success, so he decided to call us. But the partnership ended suddenly." Nobody has ever fully explained publicly why they split up. What we know is Penn went back to training in Hawaii with his longtime crew, people who knew him, respected him, and maybe were less likely to push him past his comfort zone. The Marinoviches demanded brutal commitment. They showed up at the gym before 9 a.m. every day, putting Penn through 2-hour sessions of cone drills, box jumps, and unconventional exercises. They came back in the evening for 90-minute sessions of speed and strength work, including sprint sets that lasted 25 solid minutes, the same length as a 5-round UFC fight. That level of discipline was exactly what Penn needed. It wasn't what he wanted. The 2 sides went separate ways in the middle of training camp for Penn's first fight with Frankie Edgar. Penn lost a controversial decision and the UFC lightweight title. Many people thought Penn had won that fight, but his conditioning was clearly worse than it had been against Florian and Sanchez. Dana White commented during the post-fight press conference that he was proud of Penn's willingness to take MMA training more seriously. Earlier, he felt Penn had coasted through the UFC on pure natural talent. But by then, the partnership that had unlocked Penn's full potential was already finished. The Edgar rematch was one-sided. Edgar neutralized Penn's ground game and controlled the fight with solid movement and striking combinations. All 3 judges scored it 50-45 for Edgar. Many fans felt that, under Marinovich guidance, Penn had never been in better fighting shape. The Florian and Sanchez wins proved what a properly conditioned Penn could accomplish. But instead of sticking with what was working, Penn went back to training with his boys in Hawaii. People who wouldn't push him the way the Marinoviches did. When Joe Rogan was asked about the greatest fighter of all time, he said, "He's had plenty of fights where he didn't come out looking great, but he's also one of the only guys who would go and jump up 1, 2, or 3 weight classes and bounce all around and do crazy stuff." I think that's super impressive. I think it's BJ. Even Anderson Silva called Penn the greatest of all time. Penn is the best MMA fighter I ever saw fight in my entire life. The respect from other fighters was universal. But respect alone doesn't create a legacy. Wins do, and Penn's inability to consistently prepare cost him the wins that would have put him at the very top. The slow collapse. After that second Edgar loss, Penn's career moved into a phase that was brutal to witness. He kept fighting way past his prime, taking beatings from guys who wouldn't have lasted 2 minutes with him in his best years. Penn's final record sits at 16 wins and 14 losses. For someone considered among the greatest lightweights ever, that record tells the story of a career that lasted way too long. He fought John Fitch at welterweight. He fought Rory MacDonald. He fought Nick Diaz. Each time he was smaller, less conditioned, and less prepared. Each time he lost. In 2019, Penn got involved in a bar fight that led to his release from the UFC. Dana White publicly stated that Penn would never fight in the organization again. The pattern from his teenage years had come back. Those street fights that got him into martial arts in the first place were happening again. Only now he was in his 40s, with years of damage accumulated. These weren't healed incidents. They followed a path that anyone paying attention should have seen coming. Penn had never stopped being that kid who jumped off his bike to start fights with strangers. That impulse had been channeled into a legitimate career for almost 20 years. But once the career was over, the outlet disappeared. The underlying drive remained. Penn was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame in 2015. It recognized what he had accomplished during his peak years, but by then, his peak was ancient history. The brain damage from nearly 2 decades of professional fighting can't be ignored. Penn's MMA career lasted over 18 years, with 32 UFC fights against some of the sport's most dangerous killers. Frankie Edgar, Nick Diaz, Georges St-Pierre, those wars left physical and mental scars that may never heal. But the argument that fighting alone caused Penn's current problems ignores the timeline. He was getting into street fights before he ever stepped into a cage. He was causing problems at Nova União while representing them at World Championships. The instability was always part of who he was. In 2020, Penn announced he was running for governor of Hawaii. The campaign was unconventional and unsuccessful. He didn't get elected, but the fact that some people supported him based purely on his fighting career was troubling. The campaign failed, but what happened next was far worse. The complete breakdown. In 2025, BJ Penn's life fell apart completely. Penn's first arrest of the year happened on May 25, 2025, following an incident with his 79-year-old mother, Lorraine Shin. According to court documents and police reports, Penn allegedly attacked his mother by shining a flashlight in her eyes, grabbing her arms, and shoving her against a vehicle. The next day, he got arrested again for violating a stay-away order by going into his mother's house. Later, he was arrested a third time for failing to show up in court. According to Penn's mother, Lorraine Shin, he's suffering from Capgras delusional syndrome. In her request for a temporary restraining order, Shin said Penn has been using extreme psychological abuse toward me, that I'm not Lorraine Shin. I killed his family and have taken over his mother's identity, and he wants me removed from his home. Basically what's happening is, he believes his mother and his brothers are trying to steal his estate, his inheritance, and they're not really who they claim to be. Capgras syndrome is a rare psychological disorder that makes people falsely believe those closest to them are imposters pretending to be family or friends. While there's no single known cause, brain injuries and neurodegenerative diseases are thought to be among the potential triggers, along with schizophrenia or other mental health conditions. The condition is extremely rare. Many psychologists report seeing only a few cases across entire careers spanning decades. But the symptoms Penn displayed matched the diagnosis perfectly. An unshakable belief that family members had been replaced, accusations of conspiracy, and theft, escalating confrontations with the people he once loved. The tragedy gets worse when you consider that his fighting career likely contributed to whatever neurological damage might be present. CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is still poorly understood, but its connection to repetitive head trauma is well documented. Penn took punishment from some of the hardest hitters in MMA history over an 18-year career. The cumulative impact of those shots can't be dismissed. Penn has posted multiple disturbing claims on social media, claiming that his family members have been murdered and replaced by imposters. In one video, he argues with a woman who appears to be his mother, yelling that she's not his real mother. On episode 23, 39 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe Rogan talked about Penn's situation. BJ Penn claims that his family are imposters, that someone has kidnapped his family and replaced them. Penn was arrested for a fourth time on June 12, 2025, for violating the temporary restraining order by entering his mother's house. He posted $3,000 bail and was released. In court proceedings, Penn made unrealistic demands before the Hilo family court, asking that his arrest warrants be dismissed, that the 100-yard restraining order be lifted, and that his mother provide him with housing. All three requests were denied. The man who once had generational wealth, a family compound, and a legacy as one of the greatest fighters in history, was now banned from his own home, unable to access his money, and apparently unable to recognize his own mother. On November 4, 2025, Penn was arrested for the sixth time that year after allegedly punching and kicking a 45-year-old man multiple times at a house in Hilo. The victim needed medical treatment for his injuries. Penn was charged with third-degree assault and released after posting $1,000 bail. Penn's mother, Lorraine Shin, said, "I love my son. I'm here to protect and help him. We need to pray for him and do whatever is necessary for him as he suffers from Capgras-de-Louza syndrome." In her restraining order application, Shin included a request for medical treatment or other source of therapy, emphasizing that criminal charges alone aren't enough to address what might be a serious mental health crisis. This is the tragedy of BJ Penn. Not that fighting destroyed him, though it played a role. Not that he lacked talent, he had more than almost anyone who ever lived. But that at every crucial moment, when discipline and good judgment were needed, he went the other direction. BJ Penn was probably the most talented fighter of his generation. He had money, opportunities, and abilities that should have made him the undisputed greatest of all time. Instead, he's become a warning story, proof that talent alone, without discipline, without smart decisions, without the right people around you, means nothing. The list of what-ifs goes on forever. What if he had stayed at 155 his entire career? What if he had kept working with the Marinovich brothers? What if he had surrounded himself with people who challenged him instead of people who praised him? What if the discipline that came so naturally in the gym had extended to his choices outside of it? We'll never know. What we know is what actually happened. A fighter with once-in-a-generation gifts who wasted them through a lifetime of bad decisions, now apparently suffering from a condition that may have been caused, or at least made worse, by the very career that should have been his crowning achievement. And now, at 46 years old, arrested 6 times in 1 year, banned from his family home, believing his mother has been replaced by an imposter, BJ Penn is living with the consequences of a lifetime of choices. His mother still loves him. She said so publicly, while filing for a restraining order to protect herself from him. She asked the court to require therapy, not punishment. She understands, maybe better than anyone, that her son needs help more than he needs jail time. Whether that help will come, whether Penn will accept it if it does, nobody knows. The fighter who never backed down from any challenge in the octagon might prove unwilling to face the biggest challenge of his life, admitting that something is seriously wrong. The Prodigy became a tragedy. Thanks for watching. Check out other videos on the screen.